What you've been watching on this channel hasn't been happening in real time. It's taken place over years. Before I continue, just a quick note. This video uses a generated version of my voice and likeness. The content itself is mine. I'm doing it this way because it's the only realistic way for me to document everything clearly and consistently. At this point in the channel, I know things have become quite dense. A lot of episodes, a lot of moving parts. So I just want to give a quick recap of events, just to bring everyone back up to speed. Before 2024, I'd had some contact with the system, but nothing had properly translated into real, structured support. Then in early 2024, things started moving again. Around February, I was told I was eligible for support through the council. On paper, that was the point where things were meant to stabilize. Around that same time, my first assessment was done. That one was remote. It was quite basic, not very thorough, and it didn't really reflect what day-to-day life was actually like for me. But it still led to a small amount of funding being approved for care. Even then, it wasn't enough. And from that point on, I've essentially been trying to get that corrected. As 2024 went on, things started to become more complicated. There were financial elements layered into the system. Payroll, contributions, deductions, and it wasn't clear how any of it properly worked. What I did understand was that the structure didn't match reality. The support on paper didn't translate into something stable in practice. At the same time, my situation physically was getting harder. Daily life was becoming more difficult, more effort, less margin, more reliance on support that wasn't actually there in a consistent way. Then later in 2024, there was a second assessment. This one was done properly, face to face with support there to help me explain things clearly. That was the first time I felt like my situation had actually been understood and properly captured. But shortly after that, the social worker disappeared from the case. Communication stopped, and the work we'd done, the proper assessment, never seemed to carry through into anything official. From that point on, I was left trying to recover something that should already have been in place. By late 2024, things had started to break down more clearly. I was chasing responses, not getting clear answers, and the situation was becoming harder to manage. Eventually, a new social worker was assigned, but by then a lot of continuity had already been lost. Going into early 2025, everything was still unresolved. The care wasn't right. The structure didn't make sense. The proper assessment hadn't been recognized. And I was still trying to push all of that forward at the same time. That led to the meeting. That happened in March 2025. It was meant to bring everything together and actually resolve things. It didn't. After that, the same pattern continued. Delays, missed responses, things being pushed back, no clear resolution. By mid-2025, I was still trying to get the proper assessment recognized, still trying to get the care corrected, still dealing with the same underlying problems. And around that time, my health gave way. I ended up in hospital. That wasn't separate from everything else. It was what all of this had been building towards. Trying to manage without proper support for too long. When I came out of hospital, something was put in place so I could leave. The temporary care, the structure around it, someone coming in to help with the basics, getting me washed, fed, moved safely. It wasn't a proper system, but it gave me just enough stability to think clearly, and just enough free funds to employ someone for a few hours a week to help sort out my care package situation. That's when Jess stepped in, and for a while, things looked like they might stabilize. Communication improved. There was a sense that the situation might finally be handled properly. But that didn't last. Looking back, the reason becomes clearer. Most people, when dealing with systems like this, default to being reasonable. They don't push too hard. They don't escalate unless they have to. They try to work within the system. That instinct feels right, but it reduces pressure. And without pressure, nothing moves. What came back was a reduced version of my needs, framed as reasonable, something I was expected to accept. I didn't accept it. And shortly after that, Jess stepped away. That's the point this channel has now reached. And it's also the point where something had to change in how I was approaching all of this. That attempt, working through someone else, had already failed once. Next, I used the small amount of funding I had to replace Jess with another employee. He wasn't formally a lawyer, but he had some legal understanding, and more importantly, he was initially prepared to step in and put his name on things. That was the whole point. By then, I was already doing the work myself. I was writing the emails as things happened, responding, tracking, keeping everything moving as best I could. There wasn't some complete plan. I was building it as I went. What I needed wasn't help figuring it out. I needed someone to take what I was writing and send it in their name. By that point, most of this situation was being held together through constant back and forth. Calls, messages, follow-ups, people changing, things being dropped. Nothing progressed unless I actively pushed it. And if I stopped pushing, even briefly, it stalled. So the arrangement was simple. I would write, he would send. Over the course of about a month, I brought him fully into the case. I showed him everything. The history, the emails, the gaps, the contradictions. I made sure he understood what had happened and what was being said. Not so he could build something new. So he could step into something that already existed. Because the problem wasn't what was being said. It was who it was coming from. At the beginning that seemed to be agreed. But when it came to actually doing it, something changed. The first time it mattered. The first time he was meant to send an email in his own name. He didn't. He hesitated. Then he backed away from it. He didn't want to attach himself to it. And that was the point where it became clear. This wasn't about the strength of the case, or the clarity of the structure. It was something else. The same pattern again. When it came to putting pressure on the system, people stepped back. Not because they didn't understand, but because it meant putting themselves on the line. And I could do that, because I'm the one living inside it. Whatever happens, I deal with the consequences. But for someone outside of it, there's no real reason to take that risk. So they don't. And once that became clear, the situation simplified. I was to fight alone again. I already had everything I needed. The emails, the structure, the understanding. The only thing I was trying to borrow was someone else's name. And that wasn't something I could rely on. So I ended that arrangement. Not dramatically, just directly. So going into 2026, the approach changed. Not in content, in ownership. Everything stayed the same. The way I was writing, the way I was structuring things, the way I was tracking what was happening. The only difference to the plan was that it would all come from me. Fully. The situation itself hadn't improved. The care was still temporary. The system was still unresolved. But something had shifted. I wasn't trying to make the system respond using an advocate anymore. I was building something that could force it to, with my own name. And that's where the next part of this begins.